Every single day, an invisible river of ships flows between two massive oceans. Oil tankers, container ships, cargo vessels carrying the products that power modern life. From a distance, the water may look calm and ordinary, but beneath that calm surface lies one of the busiest maritime corridors on the planet. Hundreds of ships move through this route every day, carrying the raw materials, manufactured goods, and energy resources that keep the global economy running. They move silently through a narrow corridor between Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. At its narrowest point, this passage is only about 2.8 kilometers wide. Yet nearly one-third of global maritime trade flows through this tiny strip of water. This is the Strait of Malacca, a narrow waterway that quietly powers global commerce. Every day, hundreds of ships pass through this corridor, carrying oil, food, electronics, machinery, and raw materials. Together, they form one of the most important shipping highways on Earth. But behind this incredible flow of trade lies a critical vulnerability. Because if this narrow passage were ever blocked, the consequences would ripple across the entire world. Factories could slow down, fuel prices could spike, shipping delays could disrupt supply chains across continents, and the effects would not take months to appear. They could begin within days, all because of one narrow stretch of water. Geography, a natural gateway between oceans. To understand why the Strait of Malacca matters so much, you first need to look at the map. The strait lies between two large land masses. To the north is the Malay Peninsula. To the south lies the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Together, these land masses create a narrow maritime corridor connecting two major ocean systems. To the west lies the Indian Ocean. To the east lies the South China Sea, which eventually opens into the Pacific Ocean. This location makes the strait the shortest and most efficient shipping route between several major economic regions of the world. Ships traveling between the Middle East, Europe, Africa, and East Asia almost always pass through this corridor. Without it, vessels would need to travel thousands of additional kilometers around the Indonesian archipelago. That alternative route would add days to shipping journeys. It would burn more fuel. It would increase transportation costs for shipping companies, and ultimately, those costs would be passed on to consumers around the world. In global trade, even small changes in shipping distance can translate into billions of dollars in additional costs, which means geography itself has created a natural gateway between two halves of the global economy. And for centuries, ships have depended on this route. The ancient maritime trade highway. Long before modern cargo ships existed, the Strait of Malacca was already one of the most valuable trade routes in human history. For more than 1,000 years, merchants traveled through these waters, carrying valuable goods between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Chinese traders brought silk and porcelain. Southeast Asian islands exported spices such as cloves, nutmeg, and pepper. Indian merchants traded textiles and precious metals. Arab traders transported perfumes, ceramics, and luxury goods. These trade networks turned the region into one of the most active maritime crossroads in the ancient world. One of the most powerful states to emerge here was the Malacca Sultanate. During the 15th century, this kingdom controlled trade passing through the strait. Ships from across Asia gathered in its ports. Markets became crowded with merchants speaking different languages and trading goods from distant lands. This region became a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas. Whoever controlled the strait controlled the movement of goods between East and West. And when European powers began exploring Asian trade routes in the 15th and 16th centuries, they quickly realized the importance of this corridor. Portugal was the first European power to capture Malacca in 1511. Later, the Netherlands took control. Eventually, the British Empire dominated the region. Each empire understood the same strategic reality. Control of the Strait of Malacca meant control of one of the world's most valuable trade arteries. The modern shipping superhighway. Today, the Strait of Malacca is one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. More than 100,000 ships pass through the strait every year. That is nearly 300 vessels every single day. These ships carry the products that power the modern global economy. Electronics manufactured in Asia, cars from Japan and South Korea, clothing from factories across Southeast Asia, raw materials from Africa and Australia, and enormous shipments of oil from the Middle East. Some of the ships passing through the strait are among the largest machines ever built by humans. Modern container ships can stretch longer than 4 football fields. They can carry more than 20,000 shipping containers at once. Inside those containers are the products people use every day: smartphones, computers, furniture, food products, industrial equipment. Each container is part of a massive global supply chain connecting factories, ports, and consumers across continents. Together, they create a constant stream of global commerce, a floating highway connecting the economies of the world. The energy lifeline of East Asia. One of the most important resources moving through the Strait of Malacca is oil. Every single day, millions of barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow corridor. Most of it travels from the Middle East towards the rapidly growing economies of East Asia. Countries such as China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan depend heavily on these energy shipments. For these industrial economies, oil fuels factories, transportation systems, and power generation. Without steady energy supplies, economic activity could slow dramatically. For China in particular, the Strait of Malacca is critically important. Roughly 80% of China's imported oil passes through this corridor. That means a single geographic choke point sits between China and much of its energy supply, and that creates a strategic vulnerability. The Malacca Dilemma. Chinese strategists have a name for this concern. They call it the Malacca Dilemma. The idea is simple but powerful. If the Strait of Malacca were ever blocked by conflict, accident, or political tension, China's energy imports could be severely disrupted. And because energy powers factories, transportation, and entire industries, such a disruption could affect the entire economy. This concern has pushed China and other countries to explore ways of reducing reliance on the strait. Pipelines, rail corridors, and alternative maritime routes are all being developed to diversify supply lines. But even today, the Strait of Malacca remains the fastest and most efficient route. Risks in a crowded corridor. Even without geopolitical conflict, the strait faces serious challenges. The most obvious is congestion. Thousands of ships pass through the corridor every week. At certain points, the traffic becomes extremely dense. And because the strait is relatively narrow and shallow in several areas, navigation requires precision and careful coordination. Large ships must move slowly and follow designated shipping lanes. Even a single accident could create a major bottleneck. Another challenge that once plagued the region was piracy. In the early 2000s, pirate attacks in the strait became a serious concern for global shipping companies. Pirates targeted slow-moving cargo ships and oil tankers, sometimes boarding vessels and stealing valuable cargo. But in recent years, coordinated naval patrols by Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore have significantly reduced piracy in the region. Still, the vulnerability remains, because when so much of the world's trade passes through one narrow corridor, any disruption can have global consequences. Final insight: small place, massive power. On the map, the Strait of Malacca looks surprisingly small, just a thin line of water between two land masses. But in reality, it's one of the most critical pressure points in the global economy. Every day, ships carrying the resources that power modern civilization pass through this corridor.